Power, control, influence. These are not just words. They are forces that have shaped entire civilizations, altered the course of history, and determined the lives of countless individuals. But what if I told you that the secret to mastering these forces doesn't lie in giving more of yourself, but in taking a step back? What if the key to true power is to stop caring?
Today, we're going to uncover a principle that can flip everything you think you know about power on its head. Once you stop caring, they lose it. Inspired by the timeless wisdom of Niccolo Machiavelli, a political strategist, philosopher, and master of power dynamics, this principle is about detachment, not apathy, but a strategic, controlled emotional distance. To understand this concept, we need to first explore the nature of power itself. In any relationship, whether in a corporate setting, personal relationships, or even social circles, there's always a balance of control. One person often holds more emotional investment, while the other may seem detached, cool, and unaffected. But what happens when this balance shifts? What happens when you stop caring?
When you care too much, you give others the power to manipulate your emotions, your reactions, and your decisions. You become predictable, and people can exploit this. It's the oldest trick in the book, but it works every time. Your fear of losing approval, your need for validation, and your emotional investment give others the upper hand. But what if you no longer cared? Machiavelli, a man who lived in a world of cutthroat political maneuvering, understood this more than anyone. In his classic work, The Prince, he advised rulers to avoid showing any emotional vulnerability or weakness. Why? Because it makes them susceptible to manipulation by others. His advice was clear. The master of detachment is the one who controls the game.
But what does it truly mean to stop caring? Does it mean to shut down emotionally? Does it mean becoming cold and indifferent? Not at all. It's not about being heartless or having no empathy. In fact, it's the opposite. It's about freeing yourself from the chains of emotional dependency. It's about no longer allowing your peace to be dictated by someone else's emotions, actions, or approval. It's about mastering your emotional response and knowing that your self-worth doesn't depend on external validation.
Think of it this way. Imagine being in a room full of people, all trying to win your approval. They speak loudly, gesture wildly, and even try to manipulate your thoughts. But what if you stood there, completely unaffected? Not because you don't care, but because you control your own response. That's the power of emotional detachment. It's about being unaffected, not uncaring.
Take a moment and think about one of the most famous examples in history, the story of Julius Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon. In 49 BC, when Caesar led his army across the river, he took the ultimate step of emotional detachment. By doing so, he was no longer bound by the Senate's power or the approval of the Roman people.
He controlled his fate, taking the necessary risks without fear of political repercussions. He stopped caring about the political games, and that indifference to the rules and the norms of Roman society changed the course of history.
That moment of defiance wasn't about lack of care, it was about strategic freedom. Caesar didn't need the Senate's approval anymore. By crossing the Rubicon, he seized power by withdrawing emotionally from the very system that once controlled him. The act of detachment, of not caring about the system, was the key to his rise. And this is the essence of Machiavellian power.
But let's be clear. Stopping caring doesn't mean you're giving up your ambition or your drive. It's not about being passive. It's about removing the emotional stakes that others can use to control you. It's about knowing you're in charge, not because you force control, but because you've mastered emotional self-sufficiency.
So, what if you could learn to stop caring in the right way? What if, instead of clinging to emotional attachments, you could release yourself from them and reclaim your power? Stick around as we explore the art of detachment and show you how it can transform your life. The journey starts here. Let's dive in.
Have you ever found yourself caught in a situation where someone's words or actions completely threw you off balance? You felt that knot in your stomach, that surge of anger or anxiety, and suddenly your peace, your calm, your control was all gone. But what if you could stop that from happening? What if, instead of reacting, you could stay unaffected, unshaken, even in the most intense moments?
This, my friend, is the art of detachment. But here's the catch. Detachment is not about ignoring or disengaging from the world. It's about freedom. Freedom from being controlled by external emotions, opinions, or situations. It's about choosing not to react, no matter how much the world around you is falling apart.
Emotional detachment is a tool of self-mastery, and believe me, it's a tool that can change your entire life. It's about no longer being swayed by what others think or say about you, no longer being reactive, but becoming proactive. Imagine this. Instead of losing your cool when someone insults you or when your plans fall apart, you remain calm and in control. You're centered, observing, and making your next move without the emotional storm clouding your judgment.
Now, you might be asking yourself, how can this be possible? How can I stop myself from reacting when people trigger my emotions? Here's the thing. It's all about the mind. Detachment isn't about suppressing your emotions. It's about taking control of them. It's about choosing to respond, not react. Think of a chessboard. The game is constantly changing. Your opponent makes a move, you counter it. But what if you couldn't predict your opponent's moves, and instead, they couldn't predict yours? That's what emotional detachment allows you to do. You no longer give away your next move based on someone else's emotional state. You make strategic decisions based on logic, not feelings.
And this, my friends, is why detachment is a superpower. Think about it. When you react impulsively to a situation, whether it's anger, sadness, or fear, you lose control. But when you master your emotions, you become the master of the situation. You're no longer at the mercy of the external world. The game shifts. The power dynamic shifts.
Machiavelli, the master of understanding power, recognized this very thing.
In his groundbreaking work, The Prince, he tells us that to rule effectively, a leader must never show emotional weakness. A leader who allows their emotions to guide their decisions becomes vulnerable. It's simple. Emotionally weak leaders lose power. So how did he suggest leaders hold on to power? By detaching emotionally. Machiavelli said that great rulers never let their feelings guide them. Instead, they relied on reason, on detachment. They saw their world as a chessboard, a series of moves, reactions, and counteractions. They were the calm in the storm, always in control because they didn't let their emotions dictate their choices. But detachment doesn't just apply to kings and queens. It applies to you. Every single person who wants to regain control over their life, their relationships, their career, and their future needs to understand the power of emotional detachment. Let's take a look at Nelson Mandela, a man who spent 27 years in prison. Most people would break, crumble under such pressure, but Mandela understood the power of detachment. While behind bars, he was subjected to humiliation, isolation, and intense psychological pressure. But instead of reacting emotionally, he used his time to strategize. He detached from the pain, the hatred, and the emotional trauma around him. He saw the bigger picture. He didn't let the circumstances control him. And when he was released, he became the leader of a nation, not because he was weak, but because he had mastered the art of emotional detachment. Mandela's ability to remain calm, even in the face of unimaginable adversity, was the reason he became the first black president of South Africa. He didn't let the emotions of his oppressors dictate his reactions. Instead, he stayed calm, detached, and strategically in control. That was his power. Now, imagine this. You're at work, in a meeting where tensions are high. People are raising their voices. People are upset. Most of the room is reacting emotionally. But you remain calm, detached, focused on the issue, not the people. You observe, think, and then make your move. People start to notice. Your calmness becomes your power. They can't predict you anymore. You become the one in control. How do you get there? It's not an overnight change. It's a muscle you develop. Step by step, decision by decision, you can learn to detach emotionally from outcomes, from opinions, and from approval. Start small. Notice when you feel emotionally charged. Ask yourself, do I really need to react right now? Every time you pause and choose not to react, you're training yourself to be stronger. Each time you detach, you gain more control. You start to observe situations without being swept up in them. And over time, you'll find that people's opinions, their judgments, and their actions, none of it affects you the way it once did. The art of detachment is the path to true self-mastery. The moment you stop caring about how others perceive you, you stop being controlled by them. And that's when you start to hold all the cards. You'll no longer be a pawn in someone else's game. You'll be the one making the moves. Fear. It's primal. It's deep. It controls us in ways we often don't realize. But what if the fear you think others are experiencing isn't the fear of losing you, but the fear of losing control over you? What if, by simply detaching emotionally, you could create an overwhelming sense of panic in others? And what if, in that panic, you found the real key to power? Imagine this. You stop caring about how others perceive you. You stop reacting to their expectations, their demands, their emotions. The moment you withdraw emotionally, everything changes. The balance of power shifts. People who once had control over you, or at least believed they did, suddenly feel something they hadn't expected: fear. When you stop caring, they lose control. It's not just about how they feel about you anymore. It's about how they now fear losing that control. The manipulation they once held over you, through your emotions, your reactions, your needs, no longer works. They panic. Let's take a moment to understand this with a historical example. Napoleon Bonaparte, one of history's most formidable military tacticians, had an uncanny ability to remain emotionally unshaken in the heat of battle. His enemies, whether they were on the battlefield or in the courts of Europe, feared him not just for his military brilliance, but for his emotional detachment. Think about it. Napoleon's enemies, those who sought to undermine him, were constantly trying to distract him, to get him to react emotionally, whether through political maneuvers, betrayal, or threats to his rule. But what did Napoleon do? He stayed calm. He maintained control over his emotions, and by doing so, he maintained control over the situation. Napoleon's emotional detachment wasn't a sign of weakness, it was his greatest strength. By refusing to become emotionally invested in the wins of his enemies or the reactions of his allies, he became unpredictable. And that unpredictability made his enemies afraid. The more detached he became, the more uncertain and chaotic their strategies became, the more they lost control. This fear of losing control is universally human. Think about any situation where someone tries to manipulate your emotions, whether it's in the workplace, a family setting, or a romantic relationship. The more you react, the more they can manipulate you. But when you stop reacting, when you detach from their emotional triggers, they lose control over you. When you withdraw emotionally, you take away their leverage. They have nothing to push against, nothing to control. And here's the thing. When people feel like they've lost control over you, their fear of the situation escalates. They begin to panic. They react. And that, in turn, causes them to make mistakes. They make emotional decisions. They become unpredictable. But why does this happen? Why does emotional detachment lead to panic? It's all about uncertainty. In any interaction, people are constantly trying to predict the other person's next move. They want to know how you'll react. They want to control the situation. But when you stop reacting, when you emotionally detach, they can no longer predict you. And that, my friends, creates chaos. In chess, the most dangerous player isn't the one who makes all the moves. It's the one who doesn't react to the opponent's moves. They keep their composure. The uncertainty they create in the opponent's mind forces them to make rash decisions. This is the power of emotional detachment in any area of life. When you stop caring, you take away the control they have over your emotions. They lose their grasp. They feel uncertain. And in that moment of panic, they reveal their true weaknesses. They no longer know how to manipulate you, and they lose their power. This isn't about being cold-hearted. It's not about detachment for the sake of detachment. It's about taking back your power. It's about removing the emotional stakes others use to control you. It's about knowing that your reactions no longer belong to them. They belong to you. The moment you stop caring, you take control of the narrative. They panic. And in their panic, they make the very mistakes that lead to their downfall. The power is in your hands now, and that is when you truly win. Imagine a situation where you have the power to control the room, not by force, not by persuasion, but by something more subtle, indifference. A sense of detachment that leaves others clueless about your next move, unable to manipulate your emotions. That's the true power of indifference. And in this chapter, we explore how mastering the art of indifference is one of the most powerful tools at your disposal. Indifference doesn't mean that you don't care. It's the strategic removal of emotional attachment. When you're indifferent, you've removed the emotional stakes, leaving others with no leverage over you. You become immune to manipulation, not because you don't feel, but because you control what you feel. In any power dynamic, the person who cares the least holds the most control. Think about it. When you're emotionally invested, you are vulnerable. You're attached to an outcome, and that attachment can be used against you. But when you choose to remain indifferent, you're unpredictable, and this uncertainty gives you a silent but undeniable power. This is what Machiavelli taught in The Prince. He understood that a ruler who doesn't reveal his emotional hand is far more dangerous than one who wears their heart on their sleeve. Why? Because indifference becomes a powerful weapon. When you don't react to others' provocations, they can't figure you out. They lose control over your behavior, and in turn, they lose their power. Take, for example, the leadership of Queen Elizabeth I of England. Elizabeth was known for her calm demeanor and unpredictability in dealing with foreign powers. When confronted with threats from Spain or internal rebellions, she often stayed calm, calculating, and detached from the emotional turmoil that surrounded her. She didn't act out of fear or rage, but through strategic indifference. Her emotional restraint gave her the ability to keep the upper hand, confusing her enemies and allies alike. Elizabeth's story is a perfect example of how indifference becomes the ultimate power play. By removing herself emotionally from the situation, she placed herself in a position where she could act without fear. She allowed others to expose their weaknesses, all while remaining the calm center of power. This is the power of emotional indifference, the ability to remain unaffected in the face of chaos. In the modern world, the principle of indifference is just as potent. In a high-stakes negotiation, for instance, the person who remains emotionally neutral holds the advantage. The moment you stop reacting to pressure or emotional appeals, you stop being manipulated by others' tactics. You regain control of the situation. Indifference doesn't mean giving up or becoming passive. On the contrary, it's about gaining mastery over your emotional world. It's about becoming immune to external chaos. When you stop reacting to emotional triggers, you allow yourself to think clearly, act decisively, and maintain control. Indifference gives you the upper hand because you're not swayed by the storms around you. You become the storm. So, how do you use this power in your life? How do you build the armor of indifference and become the person who is always in control, no matter the circumstances? Relationships, whether personal, professional, or even familial, are often built on a delicate balance of emotions, trust, and mutual dependence. But what happens when one person stops caring? The game changes. The emotional strings that once bound the two individuals become loose, and what follows is a dramatic shift in power, control, and influence. When you stop caring, something unexpected happens. The person who once held the emotional leverage over you, whether it's guilt, approval, or need, loses their grip. The moment you detach, you stop becoming predictable. You stop following their emotional cues. And that's when the power dynamic flips. Let's break this down. Emotionally invested people are predictable. They care too much, which makes them vulnerable. But those who are emotionally detached, those who are not emotionally invested in the outcome, become unpredictable. And unpredictability is a form of power. Imagine it like a chess game. The player who is unpredictable has the upper hand. But how do you achieve this level of control? Think about Louis XIV, the Sun King of France. His reign is often seen as the epitome of absolute power. But what many don't realize is that Louis's greatest tool wasn't his wealth or military power, it was his emotional detachment. He knew how to remain calm, unaffected, even indifferent to the drama of his court. He mastered the art of not caring, and this indifference became his most powerful asset.
Louis XIV's emotional detachment created a system where everyone around him vied for his attention and favor. They were emotionally invested in his approval, and he, by not caring or reacting to their emotional turmoil, remained the ultimate authority. This detachment didn't make him less involved. It made him more powerful. His emotional indifference to the court's drama meant that the nobles were constantly chasing his favor, never knowing where they stood. They lost their control, and he gained more power than ever before.
Fast forward to the modern world, and the same principle holds. In the corporate world, power dynamics play out
in meetings, negotiations, and partnerships. What happens when someone in the room remains unmoved by the pressure, unshaken by the tension? They become the center of power as others scramble for their approval. What would happen if you stopped caring about the opinions of your boss, your colleagues, or even your clients? What would you be able to achieve if you stopped reacting to every emotional trigger in the room?
Picture this. You're in a meeting and everyone is getting emotional, fighting for attention. Some are trying to play on your emotions, making you feel guilty, pressured, or even angered. But you stay calm. You observe. You listen. And the longer you remain indifferent to their emotional outbursts, the more they begin to lose control. They start reacting to you. You become the one who holds the power, not because you fight back, but because you simply don't engage.
This happens in families too. How many times have you been in a heated family argument where one person is trying to manipulate your emotions, make you feel guilty, or bring up your past mistakes? Now, imagine if, instead of reacting, you simply stopped caring about their attempts to provoke you. What happens next? Those who are emotionally reactive are driven by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of not being heard, fear of losing control. When you stop caring, you remove their emotional leverage. Their desperation grows, but your indifference leaves them scrambling. They panic. They lose control. You're no longer caught in their emotional web. You've created space to reclaim your own power. But here's the most fascinating part. The more you stop caring, the more the other person becomes anxious. They begin to question their worth, their value to you. Why? Because they no longer have access to your emotional reactions. They can't predict your behavior. And in this uncertainty, they panic. Their need for emotional validation turns into a desperate chase for your attention. You see, when you stop caring, the person who was once in control of the relationship begins to lose their grip. The emotional leverage they once had over you dissipates. They start to question why you're not reacting, why you're not as invested as they are. This is the power of emotional detachment. It shifts the balance of power. Suddenly, you're not just participating in the relationship, you're leading it. So, what's the takeaway? Emotional detachment isn't just about withdrawing from relationships. It's about mastering your emotional responses and taking back control. The moment you stop caring about someone's emotional manipulation is the moment you reclaim your power. The relationships that once drained you will become the ones that work for you because you set the tone. If you found this video insightful and are ready to take control of your emotions and relationships, then don't keep this power to yourself. Share it with others who need to hear this. Like, share, and subscribe for more life-changing strategies that will help you master your emotional intelligence and navigate power dynamics with ease. Remember,
The moment you stop caring is when you truly start winning. Let's take this journey together. See you in the next video.